The year is 2008. Bennett Foddy has released a new Rage game. The year is 2017. Bennett Foddy has released a new Rage game. The year is 2025. Bennett Foddy has released a new Rage game. And this one is actually really good. 2025 was a tough year for games to get noticed. There were breakout indie hits like Blueprints, Dispatch, Mega Bonk, Schedule 1, Peak. Everybody adored Expedition 33 and Hades 2, and we even got the long-awaited indie darling in Silksong. It's probably because of this that Baby Steps, one of the best games of 2025, went surprisingly under the radar. That's really a shame. Let's talk about it. Why I think Baby Steps is an unhinged masterpiece, and what this game is hiding underneath the surface. Baby Steps casts you in the role of Nate, a layabout 35-year-old man who is an all-around fail son. Unemployed and not in school, he has no greater ambitions than laying around all day in his parents' basement, eating pizzas, watching One Piece, and smoking weed. But suddenly, one day, Nate is transported into a strange and mysterious world where he cannot be injured or die, with seemingly no way home. With nothing better to do, Nate resolves to climb the mountain at the world's center, meeting a cavalcade of strange and befuddling characters along the way, with the promise of a wish that he could potentially use to send himself back home. Baby Steps is a weird game. It's a collaboration between the infamous developer Bennett Foddy, creator of Getting Over It and Quap, with Gabe Cusillo and Maxi Bach, both of whom worked on 2019's Ape Out. It's a Rage game like Foddy's previous work, but hasn't attained anywhere near the prestige or popularity of his other games. For reference, Getting Over It has over 40,000 reviews on Steam, whereas Baby Steps has less than 2,000. There's a few obvious factors, with the biggest one probably being price. It's $20, which is a tall asking price for this genre of game, especially when up against a game like Silksong. It's also, to be frank, pretty ugly, and its improvisational Rick and Morty-esque humor and cutscenes probably put a lot of people off.
Can you not?
I didn't.
Yeah, let's go back in time to when you didn't.
No, I was just trying to catch it with my, sorry.
With your
using my...
I'd imagine there were a lot of people refunding this one within the first 2 hours. And it's really a shame, because once you push past all of that, Baby Steps is both a lot of fun to play, and it actually has something pretty poignant and powerful to say. The gameplay is very simple. Left stick moves Nate around, and you can use the triggers to lift up his feet. Simple doesn't mean easy, though, and you will fall on your ass a lot as you relearn how to walk, much like a baby taking its first steps. Nate is uncoordinated and clumsy, and you'll often trip over random things without really knowing why. The game's pretty janky in general. Here I am, transporting a one-of-a-kind priceless heirloom that will permanently break if I fall even a single time. It actually teleported back into my hands when I returned to this area later, but I fell within a minute. That was devastating, honestly. Still, once you've gotten used to the basics, there's actually a lot of fun to be had with the game's unique style. You'll slowly learn the ins and outs of which types of terrain are easiest to navigate. Stone and rock naturally provide the most grip, so they're usually the safest bet. Mud and other goopy surfaces can be navigated if you're quick, but one solid fall is all it really takes to send you back to the beginning. Walking through overgrown bushes is slow and cumbersome, and rushing water is usually a non-starter. Damn if Nate can't swim like a fish, though. The setbacks are a part of the experience, but I do want to highlight that Baby Steps is a bit of a departure from other Rage games like Getting Over It. These games typically revel in hair-pulling frustration, like sending you all the way back to the beginning of a level, or even the entire game if you screw up once. By comparison, Baby Steps is far more forgiving. Most obstacles will only deposit you at the beginning of the climb if you screw up, and the game pretty heavily signposts anything that would result in a more significant drop. The intended path up the mountain is also pretty straightforward, mostly. You can use campfire smoke and distant fire towers to orient yourself in most situations, which is helped by the fact that the mountain loops in on itself. It's only in the optional challenges that the game starts to throw in major curveballs. To that end, the world design in Baby Steps is really fascinating. There's actually a shitload of optional cutscenes, objectives, hats, and pseudo-collectibles in the form of various fruits that Nate can eat.
Ooh, is that a persimmon? Oh, yes. Oh, that was so good. Yes, not astringent at all. Just perfect and jammy and funky.
You're probably only going to find a fraction of this stuff in one playthrough, though. Most of it isn't necessarily hidden, but just placed decently far off the beaten path. As well, a lot of the stuff you can stumble upon doesn't result in a cutscene or an achievement. You just get the reward of finding it and playing around in it, and that's really it. There's no map or anything. Hell, there's a pretty funny gag early in the game where you're presented with a mini-map, complete with Ubisoft-esque question marks placed everywhere, but Nate is too awkward to accept it. Of course, the joy is in the journey, not the destination, and even while recording footage for this video, I found myself often distracted by the plethora of random crap placed everywhere. For instance, did you know there's a barn here, for no reason, with a baby chick that follows you around and a donkey? I didn't. There's even a sand pit where you can get stuck and need someone to bring a ladder to get you out. There's actually a few traps like this throughout the game, and frankly, it's funny every time. I also got to see one of the elusive Hat Minigames, these FNAF-looking pixel minigames you get by sleeping at a campfire with the hat equipped. I accomplished this with the GoPro hat, which forces the game into a first-person view. It was nauseating to play, and I could only assume how it feels to watch, but I managed to play more of the game than I expected with this thing on. Which is to say about 10 minutes. I also want to give a brief shout here to the soundtrack. It's weird, mostly consisting of nature sounds like random animal barking and noises like leaves and branches rustling in the wind. It's not going to be to everybody's taste, but when it hits at the right time, it's almost majestic in a weird way. But I actually don't have much more to say about the game's design by itself. It has a lot of fun and interesting challenges spaced throughout, and I enjoyed getting used to its control scheme, but it wouldn't be a quarter as memorable in my mind without its cast of freaks. Nate isn't alone in his trip up the mountain, and he encounters a plethora of other weirdos who are mostly helpful but also deeply strange. There's Jim, the helpful but passive-aggressive guide who continuously pops in to help Nate, fellow newcomer Mike, who's always peppy and optimistic, and a group of strange, donkey-headed dude bros who are always naked. Trust me, if I didn't have the censorship enabled, they would be hanging dong. But before I can talk about any of them, I need to discuss Nate himself. Nate is a man-child. He's a 35-year-old man with no job, no partner, no real prospects, just stuck living in his parents' basements with no ambition to improve his situation. He is deeply awkward, anxious, and a habitual liar, always trying to worm his way out of any social interaction as quickly as possible. He desperately needs help, but is too afraid to ask for it, and always tries to handle situations on his own, much to the detriment of both himself and the people around him. He's also incredibly pea-shy, and finding somewhere to go where he won't be interrupted or spied on is kind of his primary objective throughout the game.
Please, here we go.
Knock knock.
Oh no.
Is there somebody in there?
Oh, hey, Mike.
So much of this game, both in content and in themes, revolves around Nate's stunted development. There's 3 major themes I identify while playing this game, and here's number 1. Nate is an overgrown toddler. I mean, he literally looks like one with that dumpy frame and button-up onesie that's always getting dirtied. It's kind of a running theme throughout the game that basically nobody really treats Nate like a peer or an adult, which colors both their interactions and their perception of him as a person. This leads me to theme number 2. Nate's parents didn't raise him properly and don't really know what to do with him now that he's a layabout fail-son adult. His dad, in particular, seems to harbor quite a bit of resentment towards Nate, and is more than eager to get him out of the house. He's calling for a family meeting in the opening before Nate gets whisked away, and also exchanges some words with him in a handful of truly heartbreaking phone conversations you can uncover throughout the game.
I might actually be home tonight.
Okay, there's no rush. I got this. You don't need to come home. That's fine.
Nate's mother may not be as neglectful, but she's kind of got the opposite problem. We get the impression that she's an enabler, bringing Nate things he didn't ask for, like pizzas, and clearly being much less willing to have serious talks about his future and what needs to be done about him. I also want to mention Nate's sister, Cassie, who we don't learn much about, but we do know she's an overachiever who has always succeeded where Nate has failed, with retrieving one of her many trophies being an optional objective at one point. Clearly, she was the golden child. I bring all of this up now because I think Nate's relationship with his parents really informs how he interacts with the people around him. Let's start with Jim. Jim is a guide, the first person Nate encounters and seemingly someone who knows the world they're in inside and out. Jim continuously offers Nate help and support, which Nate rejects at every turn because of his stupid pride and anxiety. While initially jovial and friendly, Jim rapidly grows in animosity towards Nate over the course of the journey, and by the end, he's far from subtle about the fact that he's grown to heavily dislike Nate.
Well, it's not steady now.
No, well,
See you later.
Wanker.
I believe Jim is meant to be representative of someone like Nate's dad. He's outwardly friendly, capable, and just an all-around swell dude, but he never really bothers to try to properly understand Nate. He just continuously offers help, even when it's not explicitly needed or requested, and gets frustrated when Nate rejects it at every turn. Now, of course, it's not wrong of Jim to be helpful and supportive, but Nate isn't a normal guy. You can't just keep throwing the same thing at him and expect him to respond differently from how he has the past 10 times. If Jim ever stopped to consider his approach and try to help Nate differently, things might have turned out different. Besides Jim, the most recurring character is Mike. Mike is a newbie like Nate making his way up the mountain for the first time, but he's effectively Nate's polar opposite in personality. He's gleeful, sociable, and has no real concept of personal space. His presence pretty clearly makes Nate uncomfortable with how personable he is, but Mike never picks up the hint. He gladly accepts every offer of help and makes his way up the mountain with all manner of tools, like a map, a grappling hook, lanterns, and more. Also, if he was enjoying this video so far, he would definitely subscribe to the Raccoon Thumbs YouTube channel. Be like Mike. You know those memes of autistic people hating people who are 1% more autistic than them? That's what I think Mike represents to Nate. While Mike is still lacking in social graces and is very gullible, he's unyieldingly optimistic and friendly. He's likable and charismatic, which earns him both Nate's animosity and envy. He is exactly the kind of person Nate wishes he was. Somebody who is allowed to be quirky because he's still likable in most respects. Then there's the donkey-headed guys. There's a few of these, but most of them are interchangeable. They're dude-bro party animals who get drunk off of the milk Nate finds at the various campsites. Their ringleader, Ethan, accosts Nate a few times throughout the game, and tries to strong-arm Nate into using his one allotted wish to get cigarettes for him and his cohorts. Also, I cannot stress enough that their dicks are hanging out at all times, so thank God this game has a censorship mode or else this video would get taken down. Besides the obvious allusions to Pinocchio, the donkey-headed dudes heavily embody a toxic form of masculinity. They don't care about much beyond indulging in their various hedonistic desires and actively bully Nate into going along with their schemes. Nate, being a massive pushover, doesn't have it in himself to say no, even though they obviously make him uncomfortable. Really, this is just how the manosphere works. Insecure men are pulled in by this idea that embracing masculinity inherently makes them better, and all they have to worry about is indulging themselves and steamrolling over anybody weaker. But there's one exception to this rule. Moose. Moose may have a donkey head, but he's different from the others. Beyond his splotchy fur, he isn't a partying dude bro, but a fairly down-to-earth, even insecure man, just like Nate himself. In fact, he's the one person Nate grows to become at all comfortable with over the course of the game. Moose is kind, gentle, patient, and he struggles with many of the same issues as Nate himself, though Moose is clearly a bit further along in his emotional journey. There's an important segment midway through the game where Nate is venturing into a giant sandcastle, with the wish-granting cherub statue at the center. The castle is dark, difficult to navigate, and Jim happens along with a number of lanterns, offering one to Nate. Nate, yet again, is made uncomfortable by the unasked-for help and fears being made fun of by the donkey men for needing a lantern, so he rejects the help. But later, he stumbles on Moose, who similarly fears being mocked for bringing in 2 lanterns to help him navigate. Nate offers to take one off his hands, and offer Moose is more than happy to accept. Jim forces his aid onto Nate and makes him feel like a burden, passively aggressively ribbing him for the rejections and the various troubles Nate gets himself into. But Moose is patient, compassionate, giving Nate the space to ask for help himself. Again, Jim isn't a bastard for offering Nate help, but the understanding is the important part. Neither he, nor Mike, nor the donkey men take the time to actually understand Nate and his struggles, whereas Moose does. It all speaks heavily to Nate's relationship with masculinity. Most men are taught from a young age to be self-sufficient, not relying on anybody. Nate needs help, but he's deathly afraid to accept it. He fears being seen as a burden and twists himself in knots worrying about the quiet resentment others bear towards him for that. In desperately trying to accomplish things on his own, he only makes the situation worse. It's only through someone who has been through his struggles, who can approach them in a healthier manner, like Moose, that he begins to achieve any sort of peace and understanding. Now, Baby Steps is about masculinity. The game makes no secret of this, and I am far from the first person to point it out. But, and this is a big, huge, massive, gigantic but, Baby Steps is also about Uncharted. Bennett Foddy has cited the Uncharted series as a huge influence on Baby Steps, and it took me a while to properly understand what that meant. Let's start with this. There is a massive implication hanging over the game that Nate is, in fact, the son of legendary treasure hunter Nathan Drake. His last name starts with a D, his dad calls him Junior, his mother and sister both share their names with Drake's wife Elena and daughter Cassie, and his DJ name was
Nathan Bake.
Hell, there's even a sequence near the end of the game where you climb a collapsed train in the snowy mountains, exactly like the famous in media res opening of Uncharted 2. But beyond that, there are a strange number of parallels between Uncharted and Baby Steps. Uncharted is a game where everything is designed to be easy. That's not a bad thing, but the game puts all the tools in your hands to help you succeed. There's auto-aim, melee combat can be resolved with a few QTEs, and the climbing, in particular, is basically designed to be impossible to fuck up unless you're really trying. So, of course, Baby Steps is designed to be the opposite, where everything is slow and tedious and a huge pain in the ass the whole way through. Even beyond the gameplay, Nathan Drake and Nate Jr. are basically polar opposites. Drake is confident, chiseled, handsome, charismatic, always has a quip up his sleeve, self-sufficient, and he's in PlayStation All-Stars. Nate is clumsy, fat, awkward, basically has a knack for pissing off everybody around him, and he has never been invited to any kind of mascot fighter, not even Framemakers. And frankly, if we look at all of this as an extension of the game's themes surrounding masculinity, it makes perfect sense. Nathan Drake is basically the image of masculinity. He's a cocky daredevil who always saves the day and gets the girl, just open enough about his emotions to be likable, but still largely closed off and silent about his trauma. He's always had to rely on himself to get stuff done, and has developed a wide arsenal of skills that nobody had to teach him. A kid like Nate was always going to struggle being raised in that sort of environment. Drake probably wanted another kid like himself, someone crafty, resourceful, intelligent, self-sufficient, and ambitious. Cassie fits that to a T, which is likely why we see so many indicators throughout the game that Nate has always lived in her shadow.
We're doing a little thing for your sister. You know Cassie got a promotion, right?
No.
That's a big deal.
But Nate is soft, sensitive, not the smartest guy in the room, and he has a lot of mental issues. He wasn't in an environment that required him to learn how to fend for himself, like Drake was, and he's crumbled under the expectations hoisted upon him. I mentioned previously that there are a handful of hidden phone calls between Nate and his father, which I believe are pretty important. Throughout all of these, Nate's dad seems entirely unconcerned with his son's situation, and more afraid of Nate actively embarrassing him and getting all of his stuff out of the house as soon as possible. He even shows an active disdain for Nate's interests, throwing away his DJ equipment without a care in the world. Through it all, there's this sense that Nate's dad treats him more like a problem that he wants to get rid of rather than his own flesh and blood. The most telling and important of these, in my book, is the final one you can find in the Uncharted 2 collapsed train. Nate tells his dad that he's climbing a train in the snow, and for a moment, Drake almost seems interested.
I'm trying to kind of climb a crashed train hanging off a cliff.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Finally, an experience father and son can bond over. But all of that collapses when Nate says he's doing it with his feet rather than his hands. Drake wants his son to be just like him, and he can't fathom or relate to Nate doing things in his own way. It's a pretty ridiculous context, but it all goes to show that even when Nate is doing well and actually succeeding, his dad only gives a shit when it fits into his framework of success and doing things right. The idea of a self-reliant, hyper-masculine father struggling to raise a son who's his opposite in every way isn't anything new. Nate's story reminds me a lot of characters like Bobby Hill and AJ Soprano. Where he differs, though, is starting us in the middle of his life, after his parents have seemingly given up on him and are just trying to get him out of their hair. This isn't a story about Nate finally pulling himself up by his bootstraps and becoming the man he was always meant to be, either. He's maligned by self-hatred and apathy towards his own situation, and he, too, has given up on ever becoming anything more than a worthless layabout. When Nate finally gets a chance to make his wish at the cherub statue, he hesitates. He finally has the opportunity to return back home, but he has a moment of lucidity as he recalls the life he used to live. It wasn't much of a life at all. Finally, he wishes
I was dead.
But nothing happens. He stands in silence for a few moments before Ethan, watching all along, finally speaks up. It doesn't work like that here. Distraught, Nate returns to the Donkey Men, drowning himself in milk to forget his sorrows. Nate hobbles out of the castle, eventually finding himself at home, in the family living room. His mom's voice calls out for him, but trying to exit just loops back around into the living room, the environment slowly changing. It begins to fill with cardboard boxes blocking the way, but on the final loop, the floor is empty. You only get a moment to consider it before Nate is unceremoniously dumped outside, right next to Moose at the awaiting campfire. The two have a conversation about Nate's wish, and while it may be a bit awkward, it's also the first time Nate really opens up to anyone, as he realizes Moose shares in many of his fears and anxieties. The relationship is quickly spoiled, though, when Nate runs into Moose again later, and Mike pops up, who believes Nate managed to make it through the castle without a lantern. Nate is too awkward and prideful to correct him, and Moose is quickly put off by Nate's lies, leaving with a terse goodbye. Alone and disheartened, Nate proceeds alone. He finds Jim one last time at the foot of the Manbreaker, a brutally difficult climb that Jim made a set of stairs to get around. Nate, being Nate, claims that he doesn't even need the stairs, a challenge which Jim welcomes under the condition that if Nate gives up and takes the stairs, he will have to call Jim Lord. Now, I was not content to let Jim win, so you could find my full run of the Manbreaker in a linked video in the description. Take that, Jim.
Lord?
Yes, I am the Lord!
Nate runs into Mike again as he reaches the precipice of a snowy mountaintop. Mike needles Nate about climbing the mountain without a map, believing that doing so is akin to cheating, as Nate didn't have to see all of the landmarks and points of interest along the way. Nate exposes his entire ass for a moment, metaphorically, and says that Mike accepting the help he needed to begin with is more like cheating, as he needed someone else to show him where to go and how to ascend.
Jim's just done it for you. He just chewed it up, yum, 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 and then he spit it into your mouth. You're his little baby bird.
Frustrated, Mike decides to do things Nate's way, throwing his map into the fire, even as Nate practically begs him not to. Obviously, Nate doesn't actually think that Mike should have gone the whole way without a map, but he's desperately clinging to the idea that doing things the hard way, on his own and without accepting any help, was the right way to do things. Even if he knows it's wrong, his father has instilled in him that that's how a real man should go about life. It's toxic and wrong, but it's a way of thinking that is deeply ingrained into our society, and into the mind of a man like Nate. Nate awakens the next day, and a gigantic woman has appeared at the cliffside. With no other obvious way up, Nate is eventually forced to approach. The woman cups him into her arms and sings to him a lullaby, about how no matter who he is when he grows up, he'll always be her treasure. She deposits him on the cliff, giving way for Nate to proceed forward. His next stopping point is a cabin in the middle of the snow, which Moose told him that he had been building earlier. This is a weird and uncommented on part of the game. Hell, Nate doesn't even speak in this cutscene. But I think it represents an important turning point in his character. Again, Nate has spent the entire game desperately clinging on to the idea that a real man never accepts help from anybody. But here, he receives crucial help without ever having to speak a single word. Maybe he could have eventually found another way up, but in just allowing himself to be helped, his journey is made so much easier. If help was always being offered, it was never a problem to just accept it. The woman herself obviously represents Nate's mother. Like I said previously, she offers Nate help even when he doesn't ask for it. That's not always a good thing. But Nate never would have made it as far as he did, both in his life and on the mountain, without her. He always needed the help, even if he was too afraid or embarrassed to ask for it. And his mom was always patient enough to give him the space to accept the things she offered without her forcing them on him. It's wrong to just sit around and expect help will come eventually, even as he avoids or actively refuses it, but maybe it's okay to just ask. Finally, Nate proceeds through the snow. It's a long hike, but he finally stumbles upon Moose's cabin. He knocks on the door, and Moose is terse, though at least cordial. They make awkward small talk before Moose shuts the door. Nate knocks again, and the same thing happens. Nate's ready to turn around and leave, but he steels himself and knocks one last time. There's an awkward silence before Nate finally asks the question on his mind.
Could I come in?
Moose gladly acquiesces, and then the game ends.
Why didn't you say so?
Oh, maybe just for a minute. I
Yeah,
don't
just
know.
for a minute.
Yeah, okay. Maybe just stop in the toilet first.
Yeah.
Oh, and Mike got lost and crushed under a boulder, but he'll be fine. I'm sure he'll be fine. It's a surprisingly heartfelt ending for this kind of game. I'll be real, I wasn't expecting much from Baby Steps. I found getting over it really pretentious, even at the best of times, but this game surprised me with how much it had to say. Even if it's not in a traditional way, Nate finds some manner of belonging and family, a person with whom he can really be himself. He's come to realize his flaws and work to overcome them, and finally make something of his life. It really struck a chord with me, and again, it makes me sad this game didn't get the attention it deserved, because I really think it has something important to say. Oh, but don't think this means we're done. There is one crucial piece of this game left we still need to go over. Let's talk about the Hat Minigames. Now, here is the most fucked up part about Baby Steps. You can complete the entire game, get all of the achievements, see everything you think there is to see, and still be missing a pretty crucial part of the puzzle. Like I said before, there are FNAF-style pixel minigames that can only be seen by getting to the campfires while wearing a specific hat. Hats that will fall off of your head after a tumble, and are generally a huge pain in the ass to get in the first place. I'm going to say the vast majority of people who have touched Baby Steps have no idea these even exist, let alone have seen any of them organically. And I'm going to be real with you, I have only gotten one of these on my own, and the rest I had to look up on YouTube. Big shoutouts to Cuddy Flame for letting me use their footage. I will link their video in the description of this one. I'm going to be going through these in order, talking about what they mean for the game's themes and Nate's character. Many of them are very open to interpretation, so I'd encourage you to judge for yourself and come to your own conclusions. These are only my theories. Let me know in the comments if you have any other interpretations. In the first stream, when wearing the Stetson, Nate is out camping in the woods with his father, who sends about to find firewood. Nate returns with some twigs and a log, but his dad sends about to get a real log. Nate can't find anything, and when he returns, his dad is missing. Nate goes to look for him, alone and in the cold, but is unable to. The dream fades out as he continues to fruitlessly search. This one's pretty obvious, I think. Nate fears being abandoned, and this dream represents a situation where his father has left him to fend for himself, alone and delirious in the cold. I'll set a disclaimer here that these dreams may not line up one-to-one with Nate's life exactly, but I think a lot of people have had these experiences as children. Being left alone in an unfamiliar situation, unable to locate your parents, and left worried sick as your only source of safety and security is suddenly gone. Next dream, this time when wearing the propeller hat. Nate is on the beach with his family, again as a child. He talks to his mom and then his dad, both of whom are trying to reassure him and get him to jump in the water. His dad even asks him to think about what Luffy would do. Nate goes back and forth between the both of them, and they eventually get fed up and begin yelling at him to just jump in. Nate jumps, and ends up floating high into the clouds with the birds, floating along the endless expanse of the ocean as the dream fades out. This one has a lot more meat to chew on. First thing, remember when I said this game has 3 core themes, but I only identified 2? We're bringing it back, baby, because this is theme number 3. Nate's problems are largely internal and invisible, and the people around him don't take them seriously or give them proper care as a result. We've seen that reinforced repeatedly, but this is where it really gets hammered in. Second, I want to reiterate that the events of these dreams didn't literally happen, but they nonetheless reinforce how Nate feels about himself, his family, and the world around him. This dream largely serves to reinforce Nate's poor relationship with his parents. Both repeatedly pressure him into doing something he's clearly scared of, and seemed to prioritize getting Nate to get over a hurdle as more important than trying to work with his overwhelming fears and anxiety. Trying to get your kid to try new experiences and get over their fears is a good thing as a parent, but Nate's parents don't seem willing to acknowledge that he's not a normal kid, and trying to brute force him into maturing at a quote-unquote normal rate isn't going to help him. Interestingly, Nate's mom actually does acknowledge that Nate has a disorder, whatever it may be, and that Nate's dad isn't very considerate of it. Even then, while she acknowledges he has a disorder, clearly she isn't very considerate either of what it means for Nate, and the fact that he has different needs than a neurotypical kid. His dad's worse about it, of course, as he repeatedly laments where he went wrong to the point of just begging Cassie to get in the water with him. Also, clearly he doesn't engage with Nate's interest beyond the surface level, because if he knew the first thing about One Piece, he'd know devil fruit users like Luffy sink like rocks in the ocean. And finally, the ending with Nate soaring above the sea, in my eyes, represents him disassociating. Being forced into the water was clearly traumatic for him, and so he imagines flying high above it, not having to touch the water at all. His mind separates from his body to avoid acknowledging what's happening at all. I don't want to spend too much more time on this one, but it says a lot about Nate's relationship with his parents and how he feels about it. Next is the bucket hat dream. This one's a bit gross, so fair warning. Nate's in the back alley of a building, desperately looking for a bathroom. He enters and finally locates the urinal. He goes in one, but it clogs up with his urine, and his bladder still isn't empty. He goes in another, but that one clogs up as well, and again, and his bladder still isn't empty, even as he runs out of urinals. He goes anywhere he can think of. First the sinks in the bathroom, then the potted plants in the hall, even the dumpster in the back alley before he descends into the sewers. He pees into the sewers, but it never stops coming, and he eventually drowns in a river of his own urine. Yeah, like I said, it's gross. This one to me mostly ties into Nate's pee shyness throughout the game. However, if I could put on my game theory hat, it may also hint that Nate has diabetes. I mean, he's a morbidly obese 35-year-old man, it wouldn't be surprising. Excessive urination is a frequent symptom of diabetes, and so this dream could tie into a fear Nate has about the people around him being acutely aware of how much he has to use the bathroom. Just an idea, but I don't have much more to say about this one. Next is the crown dream. Nate's sitting at home waiting for a delivery, but gets a call that he'll go need to pick it up himself. Nate travels a fair distance to get his burger, complaining of how much his legs hurt along the way. When he gets there, though, the employees and customers alike treat him like an employee. Nate goes into the back to talk to the manager, who chides him for being late. Nate goes to the front register to work before the dream cuts out. This one's fairly clear-cut to me. Nate at one point held a job, but a shitty service job he was habitually late for, likely to the point of being fired. Having a job may be better than no job, but a low-pay, low-respect position like working at a fast food joint feels humiliating, especially when it feels like it's the only prospect you have. I think Nate walking in as a customer but being treated like an employee may be representative of the kind of advice I've personally gotten far too often. Hey, McDonald's or Burger King is always hiring, right? For someone like Nate, it comes with this undercurrent of, bet you love working with all that food because you're such a fat ass, huh? Clearly, a position like this was not good for Nate's already poor mental state. Next up, the GoPro dream, and the only one of these I got naturally. Nate is awoken in his parents' bedroom, who tell him he's too old to sleep with them, and he needs to go to his bedroom in the basement. He sees Cassie in the living room in, to my knowledge, her only physical appearance in the entire game. She tells him to piss off, and Nate proceeds to the basement, which is represented as a first-person dungeon. He eventually finds a jail cell, and as he approaches, he sees a prisoner, himself, as an adult. The dream fades out on the image of him trapped behind those bars. This one reinforces Nate's stunted development, as he was clearly sleeping in his parents' bed well past when they thought that was acceptable. We also get another reminder here that he doesn't have a great relationship with his sister. The imagery of the basement as a dungeon is really interesting, and I think represents a subconscious feeling that he was banished there, so to speak, so his family wouldn't have to acknowledge him. He's like a prisoner trapped behind bars of his own making, with no way out, as his parents feed and house him, but prefer to pretend that he doesn't exist otherwise. Next is the frog hat dream. Nate awakens near a pond, surrounded by frogs. He proceeds to a cabin in the woods where he meets a nice woman who invites him inside, seemingly for a date. They flirt for a bit as she tells Nate she's an artist, and he says something which impresses her, likely about his DJing hobby. She invites him upstairs to make love, but as they crawl into bed together, she complains of Nate's inexperience and awkwardness, eventually asking him to stop. Nate leaves embarrassed, and when he goes outside, he himself has turned into a frog. He talks to the other frogs, who reassure him. It's not your fault. She's such a bitch, dude. Before messages appear as the dream fades out. The lake is murky, not a tadpole in sight. Again, I think this one's pretty obvious. Nate had a poor sexual encounter at some point in his life and ended up retreating into incel communities to make himself feel better. It's an unfortunately common experience for disenfranchised young men like Nate to end up in communities that scorn women who embarrassed or rejected them to make themselves feel better. These men being represented as frogs could indicate that their rhetoric and thinking was foreign to Nate until he had first-hand experience. He avoided or ignored what they had to say until it was convenient for him to try to avoid the shame. The ending messages are interesting to me and a little bit more ambiguous. I can't tell you exactly what they mean, but saying there's not a tadpole in sight could refer, again, to Nate's studied development. If he was a tadpole, a kid, his lack of experience and awkwardness would be excusable. But he's not. He's a frog, a grown man, and he can only hold himself accountable for his poor showing. Nate can no longer retreat to the comforting safety of being a kid, where his mistakes and problems are excusable. He's a man now, with all the responsibility and accountability that entails. Next is the Tyrolean. This one's weird. Nate is sent to fetch formula for a crying baby. He goes to another house where a kid addresses him as Dad and the woman calls him Honey. He grabs breast milk out of the fridge and returns home, but the baby is gone, and the adult, apparently one of his parents, chides him for taking something from his friend's house and tells him to return it. Nate goes back and returns the milk, and the woman at the house now addresses Nate as if he himself were a baby. Nate exits, and the cat on the sidewalk has turned into a crying baby. Nate retreats back home as the dream ends. This one is the hardest for me to analyze, and I struggle to identify anything out of it, but if I had to guess, I think this one represents Nate's feelings of being infantilized. At first, he's treated like an adult. He's sent out to grab milk, and everyone around him treats him like an adult man. But when he returns, now he's suddenly being treated like a kid. The woman in the other house goes from treating him like her husband to like her baby. I think this one has to do with Nate feeling as if he can't execute even basic tasks. Even being sent out to fetch milk ends up with him screwing up and causing problems to the people around him. That's just my best guess though. Again, if you have any other ideas, make sure to leave them in the comments. Next is the Donkey Mask dream. This one's my personal favorite. Nate is alone in a doctor's office where he uses scissors to cut a tube on the blood pressure machine. The doctor enters the room and interrupts him, needling Nate about his weight before asking him to drop his pants and chiding him for his poor hygiene. The doctor leaves and Nate reads notes about himself on a cabinet. Morbid obesity, attention issues, struggles socially. Nate hides in the closet as a nurse enters, and when he emerges, he's transformed into some sort of monster. He chases the nurse down the hallway as she screams for help before the dream ends. Remember that disorder I mentioned earlier? Well, now it's being made pretty unambiguously clear what that is. Nate almost certainly has some manner of autism, ADHD, or both, and he was formally diagnosed presumably at a pretty young age. In theory, this should make Nate feel better. He has a reason now why he is the way he is, but instead, it only cements that he's not normal. Being aware of his condition only makes him feel like a monster, forever unable to be the normal human being that the people around him want him to be. He hates the way he is, and there's nothing he can do about it. I think this dream also reflects a general anxiety around doctors, which is pretty common for kids with these kinds of conditions. It's scary to have it reinforce that you're just different. And at least in my case, most doctors I've met aren't very well known for their sensitivity towards kids with disabilities. Cutting the tube on the blood pressure machine, to me, ties into this anxiety, as Nate may be worried about what such a test would reveal about himself. It could even tie into him potentially having diabetes, as I mentioned earlier, since blood work is brought up later by the nurse. That might be a bit of a stretch, though. Next is the cardboard box hat dream. Nate is at his high school reunion and talks to his former classmates, who all boast about their various life achievements, like traveling, med school, and beginning their families. All of them are unimpressed when they ask what Nate has been up to. He proceeds to another reunion, now with less people who are all older, to similar results. He proceeds again to a retirement home with only a few people remaining, before finally ending up in a room with a coffin and one other person. Without even a coffin to call his own, the other remaining person allows Nate to use theirs before the dream ends. This is another cut and dry one, representing Nate's well-founded anxieties about the people he grew up with having amazing lives and careers, while he's forever stuck in the same place. He's anxious about wasting his entire life and accomplishing nothing, and seeing everyone around him succeed and thrive only worsens his anxiety. At the end, he doesn't even get his own coffin. That's how little he has to his name. A pretty tragic one all around. Next is the trophy hat. Nate is a knight embarking on an epic quest, traversing all sorts of treacherous terrain before finally ending up at a church. He enters and finds his parents, quite literally worshipping at the altar and thanking the Lord for an award of excellence that's to be given to Cassie. His parents beckon Nate to worship with them, but he instead steals the trophy. He flees the church, trophy in hand, and makes a mad dash away as his parents call out for him, and the dream ends. If we needed any more proof that Nate resents Cassie and how his parents view her versus him, look no further. In Nate's eyes, earning the approval of his parents is equivalent to a knight embarking on a sprawling, grueling quest. And even then, his parents are too busy worshipping Cassie's accomplishments to give a shit about him. He's the fail son, and she's the golden child. The best he can think to do is steal Cassie's trophy and pass it off as his own, but that only earns him the ire of his parents. It's abundantly clear Nate has spent his whole life in her shadow, and it's caused a lot of problems for him. Then there's the bird nest dream. Nate returns to the family home and goes to sleep in his bed, only to be awoken and sent out for milk. The cashier says they'll put it on his parents' tab. Nate returns, but the house has grown much smaller and his room is no longer present. His parents also speak as if he's visiting, no longer living there. He goes to sleep in the attic, but he's awoken and sent out to fetch milk yet again. The cashier treats him like an adult rather than a kid this time. He returns again, and the house is no more than a shack now with only a single floor. Nate crawls into bed between his parents, who eagerly accept it and say that Cassie can have the beach house. You know, the one from Uncharted 4? I think this one represents Nate's fears about moving out and no longer having a place in the family home. It ties into earlier points in the game where Nate's father seems to really want him out of the house, and the whole trippy living room segment where it slowly fills with cardboard boxes. Nate's parents may wish to downsize their home, and making Nate get his own place is a part of that. But what if that doesn't work out? What if he needs to move back home with mom and dad and they don't have anywhere for him to go? Maybe the best he can hope for is that they'll allow him to sleep in bed with them like when he was a baby. It's humiliating that he's had to rely on them for so long, and I believe Nate has some deep-seated fears about ending up in a situation where his parents cannot or will not provide for him any longer. Next is the sunglasses dream. Nate is in a pitch-black cave, bumping against the walls as he feels his way out. He eventually emerges into a pristine, sunny landscape, a gorgeous vista filled with trees, cliffs, and even a waterfall. Nate proceeds to the right, off the screen, and it lingers on the vista for a few moments before the dream ends. This is a short one, and it's hard to analyze, but I have a couple theories. First, I think this dream may represent Nate's relationship with fiction, like his favorite show, One Piece. The cave represents Nate's actual life, just mindlessly bumping against obstacles with no real future. But the landscape represents his escape, these colorful fantasy worlds where everything is bright and sunny and wonderful. Ultimately, though, these worlds are just a fantasy, a 2D image on a screen, and once he proceeds beyond the boundary of that screen, there's nothing. This world doesn't actually exist, and it's nothing but a fleeting escape from his reality. On the other hand, I also think the stream could represent Nate's overall feelings about his stagnant place in life. He perceives himself as mindlessly wandering around with no real goal, and fantasizes about finally finding the missing link, the thing that will allow him to escape and live his life in earnest. He envisions all the amazing adventures he could have, if only he could figure out how to realize it, but he doesn't know how. He has no idea where to start, and it can only picture the life he wishes he lived in his mind. Maybe I'm starting to stretch a bit with this one, but it's just my ideas. Next is the paper boat dream. Nate is out at sea on a cruise, surrounded by obnoxious people who don't wish to speak to him and in fact seem to be whispering about him behind his back. He heads to the back where people in the water taunt him to get naked and jump in. When he heads back inside, the comments whispered about him become worse. Nate proceeds to the front of the boat and climbs down the ladder into the water. He sinks into the abyss as the dream ends. This one's pretty clear cut, thankfully, and showcases Nate's general anxiety about groups and people thinking and speaking poorly about him. Most people who have struggled with social anxiety can tell you about this worry that other people are whispering poorly about you, laughing at you behind your back, and thinking about how awful you are. Even if it's not true, it's hard to shake the feeling that everyone thinks you're gross. It's especially bad in this context where Nate is unable to leave, forced to endure these crowds of strangers who he believes hate his guts. He wishes he could just sink away into the abyss, far away from it all. And finally, we have the hard hat dream. Before I get into this one, I want to give a huge warning. There's no two ways about it. This dream heavily implies something extremely disturbing happened to Nate when he was a child, pertaining to sexual abuse. I won't be talking about it in any explicit detail, and I will not discuss it outside of this section. If this makes you uncomfortable, I completely understand, and I will leave a timestamp on the screen right now that you can skip to. You can also use YouTube's chapter function to skip to the conclusion. Now, for the dream itself. Nate is on a construction site where there seems to be some kind of crisis. The foreman claims Nate is the only one who could solve the problem and sends him to fetch a wrench. Despite this, Nate can't tell if any of the 3 objects in the basement even are a wrench. When he enters the construction site, there's some kind of strange, pulsating biomechanical monster in the background. He proceeds to the top of the monster, unable to remember what his dad told him to do in these situations, and once he gets there, he seems to insert the tool inside the creature's mouth. The tool proceeds further into the creature's body as subtitles appear complaining of pain and discomfort. Once the tool reaches the bottom of its stomach, the dream ends. The ending to this one seems to leave it pretty unambiguous that Nate suffered some kind of unspeakable abuse as a child. The setup of him being treated as the MVP on this construction site, despite him having no idea what he's doing, seems representative of how child abusers isolate their victims. They manipulate their victims by making them feel important and boosting their confidence, attempting to make them feel mature so as to groom them into worse acts. I don't even want to speculate on what the tool itself represents. Needless to say, Nate suffered something awful when he was a kid, something he has likely never spoken to anyone about and has tried his best to suppress, even as it's had long-lasting impacts on him. The guy has been through a lot, and it makes me all the more grateful that he's found some measure of peace by the end of the game. So here's the million-dollar question. What is Baby Steps actually about? I've seen a lot of people saying that this game is about Nate's death. He died at the beginning, and the whole other world is his purgatory, filled with people and objects that represent his lived life and force him to confront his many flaws. With how much I've talked about allegory already, I'd be dumb to deny these theories outright, but I'll be honest that I find it was all a dying dream theories in general to be overwrought and typically an oversimplification. Instead, I think Baby Steps is pretty earnest about what it is. It's about Nate having to start his life far after he was supposed to. I mean, what do you think that family meeting his dad called for in the intro was all about? I believe this whole game is about Nate desperately trying to pick up the pieces and assemble something resembling a life after his parents kicked him to the curb. It's hard and tedious and confusing, just like the experience of playing Baby Steps. He meets all sorts of people who have either been in his shoes or are actively going through the same situation, and sees how all of them are coping and have chosen to live their lives. And, okay, not to insert too much of myself here, but I do see a lot of myself in Nate. I've also struggled with this feeling of being an overgrown child. I've experienced how people treat me like I can't do anything by myself, and time again, I felt like there's no real place for me in the world. Hell, my dad is nowhere near anywhere as bad as Nate's dad, but you could tell me some parts of these conversations were lifted from our phone calls, and I believe you.
Do me a favor. Maybe not sweatpants.
Yeah, no, I can, I'll get it.
It's only just recently I've felt like I've started to realize who I want to be and what I want to do. It'd be a stretch to say Baby Steps inspired me to make this whole channel and throw myself into YouTube, but I do find this game genuinely inspiring. Just like how Nate could find happiness by taking those first steps, I'm slowly starting to make my way to a brighter future for myself. I may not be there just yet, but we all gotta start somewhere. We all gotta take those first steps. There's still so much more I could say about this game, and so much more I feel like I could analyze, but I encourage you to give it a try yourself. Find all those secrets and vistas and Easter eggs that I couldn't squeeze in, even if I made this video twice as long. And maybe, along the way, you'll reach a different conclusion. Maybe you'll find a meaning in Nate's journey that I didn't. That's what this game is all about, isn't it? Trying to find meaning in a wasted life. Even if you disagree with what I've said, I hope you can understand where I'm coming from. And above all else, thank you for taking the time to hear me out. Thanks a lot for watching. I hope you'll consider leaving a like on this video and subscribing to the channel so you'll get notified about any future content I release. Thanks again, and I'll catch you in the next one.